Joining me on the show is my good friend, the talented Christopher Jengalewski. Hey, Chris, how's it going?
Doing well, Nick. Thanks for having me.
I am absolutely delighted to talk to my guest today. 3-time Grammy winner, 6-time Country Music Association Musician of the Year, violinist, composer, and educator, Mark O'Connor. As a solo recording artist, he has sold over 2 million CDs. In 2000, O'Connor won the Grammy for Best Classical Crossover Album for Appalachian Journey with Yo-Yo Ma and Edgar Meyer. In 2009, O'Connor won a Grammy for Best Instrumental Soloist Performance without Orchestra for Journey to the New World. The O'Connor Band took home the 2016 Grammy for Best Bluegrass Album for their debut album, Coming Home. As a session musician, he has appeared on over 500 albums, recording with numerous artists such as Dolly Parton, James Taylor, Paul Simon, Randy Travis, the Judes, and many, many more. He is the founder of the O'Connor Method, a new method for strings which the New Yorker has called an American-grown rival to the Suzuki method. Mark, really glad to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Well, Mark, let's get started right at the beginning. Let's take you back to Seattle, Washington, where you grew up. And you mentioned your parents, were they ballroom dancers?
Yes, they were. And they were professional dance teachers for a period of time. Unfortunately for them, it was during the late 1950s, and ballroom dancing was going out of fashion. They were sort of like 10, 20 years, a little bit too late. Now, of course, if they had a program today, it would be a
monster.
Popular. I know, but it was just a tough time for the economy, and they struggled. And my dad had to quit and then went into labor and construction, and so I grew up with parents that were that loved the arts, at least, and wanted to make sure that their kids got music and dance lessons.
Were they musicians? Did they understand music or play any instruments?
Well, my mother did a little bit, very, very little piano, and but when I got started playing myself, they really poured their attention into supporting me and my little sister. In as many ways as they could. My mother especially, she drove me eventually all over the country to participate in fiddling competitions and guitar competitions at festivals and conventions, making sure that I had access to the finest musicians, at least on stage, and a lot of times in social settings where I would end up in jam sessions with my musical heroes as a child.
Can I ask you a question, Mark? So what age did you pick up the guitar, and what age did you pick up the violin?
So I was 6 when I formally started guitar lessons, and I studied classical for a while, and then I adopted flamenco guitar when I was 8, and then I had 2 guitar lessons going per week for a while, and that lasted until age 11 when I finally found the violin and started taking lessons on that instrument, and I just started adding other things as well. I mean, by the time I was 12, I was taking lessons on about 5 different instruments.
Do you have perfect pitch or very strong relative pitch?
I have strong relative pitch. I don't happen to have perfect pitch. It's a kind of an odd thing that happens to some of the musicians. But to play, a fretless instrument, an instrument where you search for the intonation, you don't have to have perfect pitch. It can be relative, and relative is a little bit more of a musical trait, not as much but as a novelty.
By the way, that guitar teacher who was working with you, what did you learn with that guitar teacher?
Well, early on, I had the fortune to have the best guitar teachers in the city of Seattle. Calvin Christ was my classical guitar teacher, and he himself graduated from the University of Washington with a guitar degree. Actually, he was the first recipient of a classical guitar degree from the University of Washington in its history, and that was 1961. And then also in the 60s, there was a Peruvian flamenco guitarist that we discovered that started teaching me at age 8, and he was fantastic, a really authentic flamenco folk guitar playing. And from him, I started learning by ear. And so at the same time, I had, sheet music in front of me and was learning by ear at the same time. And that was all before I discovered the fiddle. Now, I actually first heard the violin played on television when I was 8, and I asked for violin from my parents, and they could not afford a second instrument. And I kept asking for it, literally begging for it at times, until I was finally afforded one, a $50 fiddle from a local pawn shop.
Oh, and this is when you saw with Johnny Cash with like Doc Watson and Clarence White, Tony Rice.
Yeah, I saw. Well, when I was 8, I saw the Johnny Cash show, and that was Doug Kershaw playing the fiddle on his first episode. That would be 1969. But it was later that I started to see some of the bluegrass players, probably at age 11, when I first got the fiddle. So it took me 3 years waiting for the fiddle and the violin, however you want to call it. And then I was just immersed into bluegrass. I saw a lot on television that year. I did see, Clarence White and David Grisman and Richard Green and Bill Keith, that Mule Skinner band on PBS. I did also
Vassar
see
Clements.
Doc Watson and Vassar Clements. I actually participated at a festival when I was 11 in the Northwest. It was the very first bluegrass festival held in the Northwest. And someone that we had met put it on, and I entered the competitions there, and I got to jam with Vassar Clements there, and Norman Blake, and some other heroes of mine. The Buck White and the Down Home folks were there, Tut Taylor, and Butch Robbins, who was currently playing with Bill Monroe at that time.
So how did you work on improvising? I mean, now I understand how you got into bluegrass, because it seemed interesting. You went from flamenco and guitar and classical guitar, and then you saw these musicians with Johnny Cash, and that kind of just started to create this interest. And then how did you work on improvising at such a young age and, using ear mostly?
Well, it was a gradual process. I mean, I didn't become a real adept improviser probably until I was 13 or 14. I was still working on my variations. I would work on my own variations, though, and I started writing a little bit. My first tunes were Picket in the Wind and Mark's Waltz, and both of those appear on the album that I made called Picket in the Wind when I was 13. The year before was my very first album, my professional release. That was when I was 12, called National Junior Fiddle Champion. And even though I wasn't improvising on that album, they were all my arrangements. I would take tunes that Benny Thomasson would teach me, or Barbara Lamb or John Burke. And then they encouraged me to do it as well. They saw a special musical talent in me right from the beginning. And they encouraged me to work on my own variations, my own arrangements.
Oh yeah, Mark, talk about that. I'm so curious about your studies with Benny Thomasson, who is a Texas fiddle player, and then he went back eventually. But you mentioned in an interview that he would work on themes and variations almost like a classical composer.
Yeah, he was quite an incredible talent. In my view, probably the greatest American fiddler ever. And he was responsible for, like 50% of the repertoire that was created out of his time. Tunes like Sally Johnson and Gray Eagle were largely his constructions, at least the long form that became known as those epic fiddle tunes from America. Yeah. Say, Old Man, Can You Play the Fiddle is another one. And so what he was doing was he was teaching me how to do, virtually the same kind of thing. Look at a theme, develop that theme and create new variations and extend the form of the piece, form of the original theme. And so I started doing that, probably from my first lessons from him at age 11. I started to do it pretty well by the time I was 12 because I recorded those variations on an album. And that continued through Picking in the Wind, where I was coming up with more stuff. And I started to improvise a lot more at age 13. And, the biggest difference between improvisation and something like arranging or creating variations or writing music is that improvisation is a spontaneous composition, if you will, where you're trying to figure out lines and ideas that you can play on your instrument in real time. So you just have to be, more adept at transferring what's happening in your imagination to your hands and fingers to manipulate the instrument you're playing in that way. And those skills develop probably over time. But I was definitely immersed in it right from the beginning when I started to learn how to play the violin.
Were you also aware of the great violin literature and the classical tradition at that same time when you picked up the fiddle?
Yes, my mother was a classical music fan, and so during the times that I was playing classical guitar for the first 10 years of my childhood, there was nothing but classical music being played in our household on the phonograph, and those records included some of the great violin classics. Because she was she loved really everything. She loved violin, concerti. She loved piano, and she loved guitar, obviously, or she wouldn't have started me in classical guitar. She loved Segovia. So, yeah, some of her favorite violinists included Yehudi Menuhin, who I later played for and knew. She loved, Perlman and Heifetz and, pretty much all the violin players that I like and admire in classical music today.
What I like about the anecdote with working with Benny Thomasson is that it seems like he really wanted you to develop your musicianship, your creativity, and not just get you to master a technical piece. Can you talk about your development as a composer and an arranger and all the creative elements that came into your musicianship?
I think I was inspired during that same time, probably from age 14, I started getting into jazz, and even what was called rock fusion or jazz fusion music at that time. I started getting to be a big fan of Jean-Luc Ponty. And, you couldn't help but notice that he's writing all of his pieces. So it's a little bit different than the traditional players, even in jazz, where some of my favorites and who became my mentors, Stefan Grappelli and Joe Venuti, they wrote some tunes, but they mostly improvised on classics. Someone like Jean-Luc Ponty was coming up with not only his own pieces of music, but his own style. And that piqued my attention. And then I started getting into music like by the Dregs, for instance, when I was 14 and in high school. And I later joined the Dregs when I was 19. So I started eventually becoming colleagues to the very people that I grew up listening to, admiring, and being inspired by. And, of course, the Dregs played all their original music, Steve Morse. And so that part of music making really piqued my interest, and I wanted to do more and more of it. And I'll have to say, at some point, I sort of got bored, maybe, arranging folk music like I was. I was pretty good at it, but I think I hit a wall somewhere around age 15, and Rounder Records luckily allowed me to start recording my own pieces, and that re-engaged me into the whole process of furthering and developing my music career at a young age. At some point, since I was still a student, I started to tire of what I was doing, and I think getting into composing, for instance, like Markology, which is the guitar album I made when I was 16, half of the music on there was original music that I wrote, and that really inspired me to keep going in that direction. When I was 17 for Rounder, they let me do On the Rampage, which was all 10 pieces of music on there were original. And so this really, ushered in a whole other track for me that really re-engaged me and made my playing even better, because I was chasing a couple of different tracks. I was coming up with new ideas musically and my own style at the same time.
You have a lot of curiosity for all these different styles of music, and you would hear something like Jean-Luc Ponty with Mahavishnu and just be like, well, I want to do that, even though you were coming from, classical into flamenco into bluegrass. And I guess something I've been thinking about a lot is you could easily have become just a classical violinist, but why were you more okay with just trying pretty much everything? And obviously you're fantastic at it. I mean, I think it makes better musicians, but can you speak on that, why people get really boxed into one style and they won't venture out of it at all?
Well, in the era that I grew up in musically, it was really discouraged to do more than one thing. It was the 70s, and I think that people were into specialization to the max, where even my mentors and friends, some of them, not all of them, I was lucky that Benny Thomasson was really open to me experimenting in different styles of music. And he never said no. He never held me back. He never discouraged me and only encouraged it. And that was really lucky for me, because I needed a mentor like that. But I had some other mentors in my life that I wasn't seeing regularly for music lessons, but would basically say, now you stick to that one thing that they liked me doing. That's what you need to be doing, because that other stuff will hurt your playing or hurt this or hurt that. Or, I always, from a lot of folks, I heard no and negativity and harm, and it'll be harmful and these kinds of things. And I was, I guess, too strong of a personality, even as a child, to succumb to it. And I listened to them. I heard the no's and the negative, energy coming out, but I just sort of ignored it. And now, thankfully, today, I think I've been a part of, opening that up and proving to young musicians that versatility is a real strength, especially in American music, where everything has tributaries towards each other. Like for some reason, people forgot that there's blues in bluegrass, and there's African American spirituals in jazz, and on and on. I mean, like there's a hoedown in everything. I mean, we wouldn't have rock and roll without originally having the hoedown. So I started to put the pieces of the puzzle together and prove that it could be done again, and have really a full range of interests, and musicians still excel in having more than one interest.
You made a really interesting statement. You said that jazz and ragtime was born on the violin, and most people wouldn't picture that, because when we think of jazz, we think of big bands and we think of quartets, small combos, but it really is true, and the violin was ever present in popular music at the time. Could you speak to that, actually, how the violin had such an important role to play in the birth of a lot of contemporary styles?
Absolutely. And this goes back to the 1830s for ragtime, which was the original description of ragtime was called cakewalks. And it happened on the plantations in the South, where the American violin, the fiddle, was prevalent. And is a music that is perfectly suited for bowing. Swing rhythms played by the bow, the up and down strokes of bowing on the instrument, produce any number of very intuitive syncopations and various amounts of swing rhythm in the bow. And this lent itself to a whole new style of music that came out of the cakewalks, which became ragtime. It was popularized, though, with piano and piano transcriptions and publishing. And so it's another kind of interesting, mysterious fact about American music history, that the violin was central to its birth and bringing it into popularity, but then eventually was pushed aside and ignored for other instruments, other environments. Matter of fact, speaking of band, John Philip Sousa, who became very popular around the turn of the century, was originally a violinist, and he pushed the violin aside to pursue band and band arrangements, thinking that was going to be most popular. So people were looking for the new thing, and back then, band and piano, and then eventually by the 1940s, guitar was going to be the most popular instrument in the world. And so the violin was there the entire time, though. And so I kind of remind people of that, of the strength of that instrument, how it gave birth to American styles.
I didn't know that about Sousa. That's really interesting. You have a wonderful blog where you actually talk a lot about the history of the violin, and some of the great composers, a lot of them played violin. For instance, we know Mozart was a virtuoso. He played violin. Beethoven played the viola. I'm very interested in the Mark O'Connor method, because you've really shown yourself to be an excellent pedagogue, and you're very articulate, and you clearly know the history when it comes to the violin and music in general. Can you speak a little bit about how violinists back in the day used to be what are termed player composers? They could compose, they could write, they could improvise, and that tradition was very common back in the day.
Yes, it was. And matter of fact, it was necessary because I don't think we would have, half the classical music we do today without the player-composer. Of course, you mentioned Mozart and Beethoven. Bach was a fantastic violinist, and so was Mendelssohn. And Dvorak was a professional violist. And on and on. I mean, sometimes we think of the player composers as Paganini and the virtuosos, but it's sort of like in American music, I would make a parallel to, say, the Duke Ellingtons and Count Basies of jazz. I mean, they weren't necessarily known for their virtuosity, but they were player composers. They were in the band playing, they were writing the music and putting it on stage with their colleagues. And this is obviously has a tradition in American music, but it for sure has a tradition in early classical music. It's just really the last few generations, probably since Fritz Kreisler, the famous violinist that was really well known as a composer. It was really since his incredible career, really, that the violin started to become less and less creative with the player itself.
Well, why do you think that is? Why is it now that like classical musicians, and maybe I shouldn't make the generalization about all of them, but they don't improvise, they might not understand how to arrange or compose their own music, or really analyze what they're playing, understanding the changes they're playing. I mean, it is beneficial, right, that they know what they're playing and how to improvise over it and how they could reharmonize or compose as well, or write cadenzas and the like.
Yeah, I think it really is basically the training. I think the training started to move in a direction, probably World War II era. The training started to move more and more into a technical direction, and then Suzuki came along, being the most prominent violin method in America, and completely trained the students away from being creative and being technical instead. Memorization, repeat until you drop. That kind of training where I never had that. I never experienced it. Nobody, Benny Thomasson didn't tell me to practice Sally Gooden until I had every single note picture perfect.
It seems very unnatural in the sense because we know from history that Heifetz, when he came to America, he was very creative. He was really taking part of the American music scene. He was writing pop songs. And many of these old European virtuosos, they were full musicians, and they really dove into the music scene of America when they came over.
Yes, I mean, and people like Jascha Heifetz had theory in their background since probably the advent of the modern music conservatory. I'll say since World War II era, theory was introduced to most violin students at college. Over the last couple of generations, when they probably should have had theory when they were kids, so they could use it in their own musical development. And for instance, I mean, I knew what chords were when I was a little kid, and so when I started playing violin, I was immediately relating my notes, my sequence of notes, my themes that I was learning on the violin to a chord, to harmony, to counterpoint, to rhythm. I mean, if you don't access music through these different bridges to connect the dots, really, as a full musician, then you become sort of like Memorex, that you're just someone presses play, and then your sequence of notes comes out. And while that's technically adroit and perhaps entertaining on some level, for me, I wanted much more out of music. I just didn't want to be a technician, even though I'm known for my technical ability. And I think that I sort of prove that through creative inspiration, you become better as a player. If you're going to be that kind of, if you're going to be on that level, it all works together.
We had a great guest a month or two ago, the great classical improviser, Dr. John Mortensen, and he mentioned, you were talking about theory there, Mark, and he mentioned that in the 18th century, everybody knew figured bass, which is in a way knowing chords, and it was just, everybody knew it. It was just standard if you were a musician, and now nobody really knows. Like you were saying, like theory only starts in college.
Yeah, I mean, it's required when you get into music school, and then you take 6 months of music theory. And I was thinking, gosh, that's like so late in the development of these musicians, especially so since violin, in particular, we start students out so young. Like I think it'd be different for whatever for this theory to put forward. It's like, say, if all violin students started at age 12. Then if you got a bunch of theory at age 17, well, that's 5 years into it. It might not be too late to apply that theory to your actual playing. But if you're going to start at age 4 and 5, that's a lot of years to go as a performer, as a player, and without connecting what you're doing to theory, to harmony, to composition, to arranging, to improvisation abilities. Because it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. And since we start off the kids so young, I mean, they have been playing a long time by the time they get into college or music conservatory.
So how is your approach different? Like, do you want to talk a bit about the O'Connor method and like what reforms you're bringing? And actually, if you could also, if we go back just a bit, you were talking about repetitions, and like to what degree would you say, like, you do want to practice patterns, scales, arpeggios, rhythms. How much of that do you, like, if you broke up your practice, and if you could also get into a bit of how your program works as well, like how would you suggest a violinist or any musician practicing and breaking up their practice?
Well, I would definitely mix it up some. I mean, there's no reason why musicians, whether they're amateur, professional, or students, need to memorize every single thing they learn. That's one thing. It's like mix it up a little bit. It's like I mean, what are you going to perform on stage? Obviously, if you're going to get on stage, you'll want to make that piece as perfect as you can. So that part of your year is dedicated, okay, what pieces I'm going to perform in my recital or at the end of my school year's recital or whatever that is. I get that. You want to prepare. But everything you learn doesn't have to go through the same, meat grinder. I mean, I like to mix it up, saying, "Well, this tune, let's tune this, let's learn this by ear," or on this tune, this going to be more about creativity. We're going to learn how to improvise on this piece of music, and this song, maybe it's like, well, guess what? On this song, you're not going to learn the melody. You're going to learn everything else about it, including how to accompany it. Maybe on a second instrument, and this idea really gave way to the O'Connor method, and how I think it's absolutely necessary that we get back to music basics for string students, where they are not only a part of the orchestra, but a part of any ensemble, a part of a band, a part of jazz again, a functioning member of the musical community that can contribute on any different amount of levels necessary. I mean, I got so tired of running into situations where I'm hearing that the violinist can't fit in with an ensemble unless they had a page of sheet music in front of them to read from. And I'm thinking, that's nice when it happens, but it's not going to happen every time. So what do you do then? You just say, no, I can't, or no, and you don't take the advantage of this wonderful opportunity to share your music with a new set of friends or a community. And so we're missing out, basically. It's like if you keep lessening the opportunities for children to be involved and engaged in music, and then we're not winning in violin anymore. We're taking ourselves out of the picture, out of the game.
You mentioned that Suzuki is the predominant method of string training for children in the United States. How is the O'Connor method different from the Suzuki method? So parents listening, they can make sense of what's happening, and because they might hear that Suzuki is popular. What different things does the O'Connor method bring to the table?
Well, one of the things, and it's a big one, is that we use American music for the beginning books especially, and the really strong folk songs and styles that the American scene has produced over the last several hundred years. Some of the staples include the African American spiritual, the blues, the hoedown, a ragtime, folk songs, and the like. Another big aspect about it is that it really does concentrate on cultural diversity. For any kind of educational program that doesn't involve culture beyond, dead white people from Europe, I think is a mistake, especially in America. But I think all over the world, people are relating to the idea that we should be celebrating the world's culture that informs our life today. And violin should reflect that. It always has in the past. I mean, violin goes back hundreds of years in Mexico. It goes back hundreds of years in South America. There's no reason why we should be denied all these amazing styles, especially from Africa, the Middle East, and important cultures of the world that have brought forth string playing and string culture. And so the diversity of culture that informs American music is really important. The creativity and improvisation, putting music in a method book that allows the child to think outside the box. So it's not always about the specific notes on the page all the time, although I think they're important and they should be addressed. And we want our students to address those notes as well. But we don't want the music lesson to end there. We want the children to add something of their own to it. And I think The fourth component of personal expression is utmost, I think, a trait in American music life that's really important. I mean, you hear all the great, say, electric guitar players in, say, rock music, and every single one of them has their own style. They're playing sort of the same guitar through the same amplifiers, but they have their own expression. And I think that's so beautiful. And we had that at one time in classical violin, and we lost it because of this kind of homogenized training. But the fiddlers in American folk music have always retained that, arguably up until this last two generations, when Suzuki became so prominent, even in fiddle music circles. I don't know what happened, but we started to lose our American music identity, even with the fiddlers. So I think the O'Connor method is about being more creative, having a creative lesson plan, but without forgetting about the string orchestra, and preparing those same students for orchestra if they wish to follow that track. Because I think that's important, that there's a methodology that's inclusive and doesn't leave important things out, like the orchestra.
Can I play devil's advocate? Will the O'Connor method adversely affect playing the classical repertoire? How do you teach technique in the O'Connor method?
I think the very first few books are important for any method. And the way I see it is that we got to get the kids hooked into music. And so say if you're 5 or 6 and you really, you become to love the violin through the O'Connor method. And let's just say by the time you're 10 or 11 or 12, and you're a good music student and you're serious about it, you want to continue, that is the point where I think that children can start to specialize. And if they want to learn more about Mozart and Beethoven, then they can start learning those techniques for that specific music. At the same time, if you're 11 or 12 and you want to learn more about bluegrass, you can specialize in that. So I think that any good method provides a jumping off point for specialization. I think that we have a great framework for children to be able to use it as a platform for whatever they want to do in music. And it doesn't hold them back. As a matter of fact, it gives them more opportunities to make their own choices.
Your method has created a lot of interest in the string community, and even many professional classical violinists have responded very positively to the method. Could you talk about how people have responded overall to the introduction of this method?
Well, it's seen its ups and downs a little bit because it was so new and so revolutionary. And I get that, because anything new in a real traditional environment, it could be scary to, especially the traditionalists. This is a very progressive idea, and now that it's been out for 8 years, now that we've seen it for 8 years, it simply works. When I first released it, I was hoping it would work. I knew that it worked on the laboratory tests, if you will, at my string camps, pieces of it at a time. But to put it all together, to see how it's grown, now tens of thousands of children are learning how to play the violin and viola and related string instruments using this method, has been just an incredible situation to see. And our string camp, actually, that we just concluded 2 weeks ago, was the largest O'Connor method string camp we've ever put on. So, and now we had 131 students come from all over the place, and these are like growing exponentially. So I feel like it's definitely something that, my teacher training sessions, I get reports right from the teachers, where many of my teacher trainers are classical musicians, but they're definitely looking for something else to inspire the young kids. But by the time you're 13 and 14 and 15 years old, the student's making a lot of the decisions. they're talking to their parents, they're talking to their teachers, like, I want to follow in this direction. And most likely the parents will support those conversations. The conversation is not being held with a 6-year-old. It's either yes or no. Do you like violin? Yes or no. And there's no conversation about, I'd like to find a different style of music, and a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old is not going to have that conversation. So we have to get a methodology out there that covers the range of children's and their children's interest in music. And when you narrow it down to such a small focus, as basically as Suzuki did, it's going to ultimately leave out a bunch of kids. Matter of fact, when I authored the method before I released it, I found out just horrific statistics from Suzuki and other methods like that, where there was a 90% attrition rate within 3 or 4 years of the violin student. So, so as many, like say 10 students walk through the door at age 4 or 5 or 6, and in 3 years, they're 90%, 9 out of 10 are gone. They've either left the violin and many of them have left music altogether, which is just a horrible statistic. And I thought, well, we definitely can improve that,
So what would your advice be to, like Nikhil and I, for example, are both educators, and you have a student that has been Suzuki-trained, or they're more of a classical musician, and I wouldn't want to take them away from that, but you just want them to improve and to understand music more deeply. How would you go about taking a Suzuki-trained teacher or student and try to get them to embrace more styles and some of the things that you're offering in your program?
Well, I think that these things are possible, and I more or less call them cultural interventions, because it's not just changing the book. It's really changing a whole life, an understanding of how music works, and it's such a shame because any of our students can play an orchestra. I mean, I can play an orchestra. My wife can play an orchestra. Any person in my Mark O'Connor band can play an orchestra. I mean, that is not a huge leap for us that have been sort of fully musically trained. We might not be a concert master. That would take a considerable amount of training and effort and excellence to reach that position. But to be in the string section of an orchestra, this shouldn't be that big a stretch. Whereas, conversely, some of these same musicians, they look at a bluegrass band or a jazz band and go, I could never do that. And what a shame, because a lot of fiddlers can. Some of this is not rocket science. It does. You don't have to be a virtuoso necessarily to participate in any of this. It should be community music, just like a community orchestra, community bluegrass, community fiddling, community swing playing. I think most music students would wish for something like this in their life.
So how has the success been with the method? I've noticed that thousands upon thousands of kids are getting on to the method and joining.
It's been tremendous, and I've created a program where people can come over to it at various levels of ability. Obviously, I really promote the idea of a young violin student starting with the O'Connor method, so they get a good foundation musically as they build their technique in order to play well. And at that beginning, they're immersed in cultural diversity and creativity in American music and all the beautiful styles and keys and eras that can inspire them. For more advanced violin students, they can come over to my book 4 and 5. There's so many duos. Just the idea of playing a duo with one other person allows them to basically kind of be in a band. Because all the music is written down, and I spent a lifetime figuring out how to write American violin playing down in literature. And over the course of my work with Yo-Yo Ma and Nadja Slaughter Sonnenberg and the Curtis professor, like, Ida Kavafian and on and on. I've perfected how to do that. And it works. You can sound good playing these arrangements as a advanced classical violinist, because I made it possible for them to access the music through literature, through the sheet music page. I think that when I play like my stuff with Yo-Yo Ma, a lot of that was written down. It wasn't improvised. And I think it really inspired people to think that they could sound free. I remember Maxim Vengerov, when he first heard me play, we both played at a gala, and he was commenting on how free the music is. And I realized that it's not as much about the literature itself as it is about the style. Why were American styles? I mean, when you think of it, think of any classical violin student. If they want to play something American, it's usually Gershwin, and it's usually Heifetz's transcriptions of a few Gershwin pieces, right? And there's almost nothing else. And I went, wow, there's so much stuff to write down for all of our players. I think it's just people like me saw this problem and wanted to try to get in there and help and spread the good word. So we've got all kinds of people. I mean, these duos, for instance, are beautiful recitals for conservatory students or the profession. I mean, this is all professional music too. It's not just it's actually not student music. Even the music in the first books are not necessarily only for students. I mean, it's professional music. Boil 'em Cabbage Down is our first song, and I jammed on that with Wynton Marsalis in France at that jazz festival. That's a YouTube, and all these little kids that are learning that song can see that and go, wow, that's my little tune. That's my tune that I began playing with, and so there's a big message there. It's inclusivity, it's cultural diversity, it's creativity. At the very same time, you're working on your technique and learning how to play better.
To end off, I'd just like to ask you some quick, fun questions, just rapid fire, and we'll just have a little fun with these. Are you ready?
Okay.
Okay, top 3 violinists that are not you. Go. Classical ones and contemporary ones.
Well, Jascha Heifetz is my favorite. I would have to say Itzhak Perlman, and oh my goodness, I think Yehudi Menuhin when he was 16, and then for fiddle, I would say Benny Thomasson at the top, and Vassar Clements, and either Kenny Baker or Johnny Gimbel.
What about top 3 composers?
Well, I love Beethoven first, and I love what Antonin Dvorak did here when he came to America and gave us the memo that American composers should use our own materials to inform our compositions, which we really still haven't got the memo yet, but I've taken it to heart. And so Dvorak is to me an American music hero. So I'm going to include him up there. And Bach. I use Bach in my book 4 and 5. I think is the greatest violin literature.
Now, what about your top 3 modern composers or songwriters? It could be like any style, contemporary.
Oh my goodness. Well, we are out on the road right now, opening for Zach Brown Band, and I'll have to say that Zach Brown's songs and his ability at songwriting and band leading and all that is blowing me away, blowing us away.
It's a burning group, huh?
In the contemporary scene, I really admire what he's doing. And he actually helped produce our two new songs, and I saw him in the studio work with us, and he's really a genius at this. So, and about vocal arranging and just tremendous. And my goodness, I probably have a lot of colleagues, since it's modern, and it involves a lot of my friends. It'll be hard to narrow it down, other than kind of like pointing out some things I've been working on with people. But some of the things I grew up listening to when I was a child still strikes me as the most important. And I think that's why music education is so important, because those are the things that are life altering. It's like when you're inspired when you're a kid, you'll never forget it.
I was going to say that you are a pretty ridiculous guitarist. So who are your top 3 guitarists?
Oh my goodness. Well, I would probably have to say Django Reinhardt, Tony Rice, and Doc Watson. But Norman Blake is, when I was a kid, Norman Blake was it for me. Growing up, I just loved his sort of more modern, late 60s, early 70s approach.
And you used to hang out with Chet Atkins a lot, right? Was he an influence on you?
Chet was he became a mentor figure for me when I was 19 in Nashville. When I moved to Nashville, I listened to a little bit of him growing up, but not as much. And he became a real fan of mine and really supported me, and we hung out together. So I think in more of a professional level, he influenced me a lot. Not as much early on my own guitar playing.
Did you ever get to play with or meet Lenny Breau, since they were so close to? I know he was close with Chet, and he was an interesting character, and he died pretty young. And I was wondering if since you were in that circle, if you had ever played with him or met him.
No, I heard, of course, all kinds of stories from Chet about Lenny. He was really affected by him, and I just missed him. I'd also include Clarence White, too. He was a major influence as well.
Proudest musical moment in your massive career? Well, give me a proud moment.
Wow. I'm pretty proud of the band, the Mark O'Connor Band, in that I can't believe that these family members are coming together to produce this kind of result. That's pretty upscale. There's not really much of a novelty about it. It's just really fine musicians coming together to play. So I was really proud, I think, of putting that together. The O'Connor method, because to see its impact on so many children, and positively, and them being inspired by music. I mean, it's amazing. The kids, they'll choose 1 or 2 or 3 songs that will inspire them, and we got them in these books. They'll either be totally inspired by Welcome Cabbage Down, or Boogie Woogie, or Beautiful Skies, or When the Saints Go Marching In, or Amazing Grace, or any of these epic foundational pieces. And to see the light bulbs go off in these kids, man, is just, it did for me. I totally get it. It shouldn't be a surprise. It's not a surprise to me, really, and it shouldn't be a surprise to a lot of people. When you take foundationally epic, strong classics that have been in our culture for hundreds of years, that never went away, that are not, had not been taught in classrooms lately, and still the light bulb goes off. They're that strong of pieces for beginners. So that's a big deal. I think probably for my own work, my Americana Symphony that I composed for Symphony Orchestra, when that was performed this year by the Charlotte Symphony. And every time I hear it and I'm in the audience, I feel, I think it's music for others. It's not about me. It's not about my playing ability. I'm able to step back from my own musical work and let it go. And I think that's a real proud moment for me too.
And the very last question, Mark, would be, what's the best advice you could give to a young musician today?
Well, I would say, don't limit your opportunities by choosing something over another just out of hand. Just keep your mind open, because almost no musician knows exactly what they're going to be doing all through being their student life. And my own kid in my band is a perfect example, Forrest O'Connor. I mean, he went to Harvard, and he was a really good academic. He graduated top 2% Harvard. He was going to go into Harvard Business School. And then at some point, he just starts liking to write songs and sing, which blew me away because he never did that at all as a teenager. He started to get into mandolin at age 14 or 15, but, kind of like, something like of a hobby.
Were you a tough dad because you're such a great musician? Did you want your kids to be great musicians as well?
No, I never made the kids practice. I wanted them to have music lessons. That was where I put my foot down. I said, you got to have a regular music lesson on anything you want, any instrument, but I just want you to be taking music. And it was pretty simple for me. It's like for me, it gave that my child another mentor in their life, some kind of leader to look up to each week. And I thought that was important for their childhood. But other than that, I'm a professional musician, and I think it would be pretty selfish for me to try to design my kids to follow in my footsteps. I'm just not, I'm not like that. I understand that's part of our past and history, but in my generation, where kids have access to go to college and study what they want to, and develop their own career, I'm not going to hold them back and force them to do what I'm doing. So it's really I'm obviously very gratified that they, full circle, he comes back and wants to play the music that I grew up playing with me. So, and then writing his own stuff, right? Singing and writing. I'm kind of blown away by it.
Well, everybody, the great Mark O'Connor, 3-time Grammy winner, 6-time Country Music Association Musician of the Year, amazing composer, educator. Wish you all the best, Mark, on your tour with the Mark O'Connor Band. I hope you pick up more Grammys and turn more heads. And thank you so much for coming on the broadcast from both of us. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much. And I really enjoyed this hour with you too. And thanks for listening out there.
And I'll tell you too, Mark, I just started teaching here in Singapore. I'm from the United States, and I'm a drummer, and Nick convinced me to come out here, and I already really love everything you're saying, and I think that we would like to bring you over here at some point, but I'll have to read through it more, but it just seems like it's really hitting the nail on the head, and I've been hearing a lot about this more blended approach to practicing music, and I want to get these kids into these folk songs, and I'll be teaching very young kids too, and I'm hoping that this will really resonate with them and make them love music. So I'll definitely have to pick up a copy of your books to get those tunes as well for myself.
Absolutely. Yeah. You got to check it out. You'll see these unbelievable results in the first year, and it's quite inspiring. They're learning, 2-3 times as fast. And then they probably won't quit. At least at those numbers. There's going to be some attrition because, that's just the way life is. But, 9 out of 10, oh my God, by year 3 and 4. So we can improve that a lot, and then the more kids we get playing, the better the world will be. Like we got to get some more positive vibes going.
Yeah, well, you know what? It sounds great bringing the Mark O'Connor method to Singapore. That sounds like a great idea.
And also, we didn't get to mention it, but you can back reference it. Maggie and I were guest soloists with the Singapore Chinese Symphony.
Oh, yeah, great.
Yeah, and that was, and matter of fact, that was only about 4 years ago, and they adapted some of my arrangements to the traditional instruments, and it was fantastic. And they filmed it, and we've been waiting for the DVD for all this time. Like they keep saying they're going to release it or they're going to send it to me because we want to put it on YouTube because people should see this. It is incredible. Like, so you got my Americana stuff like Strings and Thread Suite, and then you got an orchestra full of traditional Chinese orchestral instruments playing it spot on. I mean, the erhus and everything is pretty amazing to see and to hear. So if you know anybody over there, encourage them to get it out online. But it should be on YouTube so people can enjoy it. We need more music.
Exactly.
We got to get music online, more music online, and especially cross-cultural performances like this where, you've got American music played by Chinese instruments and to turn out so beautifully. This is it's not a novel thing. It's really gorgeous. I mean, everybody did a great job, and we really enjoyed it. So there's something to look at, and that's right in your backyard there.
Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to talk to us on the show. All the best for your touring, and we really hope you'll come back to the show. Thank you so much.
Beautiful. Thanks so much.